There's a woman who once rode a delayed train from Manchester to London, with nothing to do but stare out the window. The train wasn't moving quickly, but outside the window, the English countryside rolled past in slow stretches. And somewhere during that delay, something unexpected happened. A skinny 11-year-old boy with untidy black hair, round glasses, and no idea that he was famous, quietly appeared in her imagination. She could see him almost immediately. Not every detail, of course, not every classroom, every spell, or every adventure, but she knew who he was. She knew how lonely he felt. She knew he belonged somewhere she hadn't yet discovered. There was no laptop, no notebook, no phone. She didn't have a pen. She couldn't write anything down. She just sat with him in her imagination the whole way home. Her name is Joanne Rowling, and that boy would become Harry Potter. It would take her 7 more years before the world would meet him too. An idea alone doesn't become a novel. And it certainly doesn't become one of the largest entertainment franchises the world has ever seen. In that time, her life didn't look like the beginning of a publishing phenomenon. It looked like grief and struggle and long nights. Long before millions of readers lined up outside bookstores at midnight. Before blockbuster films. Before theme parks. Before merchandise, awards, translations, and billion-dollar box office numbers. She was simply trying to keep her life together. One of the deepest wounds came before the first book was even finished, her mother. Her mother became seriously ill with multiple sclerosis. The illness lasted for years. Joanne continued developing the Harry Potter story while watching someone she loved slowly decline. Her mother died at only 45 years old. But the grief continued to stay with her. Years later, Rowling explained that losing her mother changed Harry Potter forever. Originally, the story had always involved magic and adventure. But after that loss, death became one of its central themes. Harry grows up without parents. He spends much of the series trying to understand love after loss. The characters wrestle with grief, memory, sacrifice, and the question of what remains after someone is long gone. Many readers connected deeply with those emotions. They weren't simply fantasy. They came from somewhere very real. Not long afterward, Joanne moved to Portugal to teach English. She hoped a new country might offer her a fresh beginning. While living there, she continued writing whenever she had spare time. She also met a journalist and fell in love. The two got married shortly afterwards. Their daughter, Jessica, was born. For a brief moment, life seemed to be moving toward stability for her. But it didn't last. Their marriage eventually broke down. She left Portugal with her baby daughter and returned to the United Kingdom. She arrived in Edinburgh carrying a suitcase, her child, and the unfinished manuscript of Harry Potter. Nothing much else was happening in her life. The years that followed became the part of her story. People often summarize in a single sentence. But those years deserve more attention, because for her, money was extremely tight. She continued to rely on government assistance while raising her daughter as a single mother. There were days when the future felt uncertain. She wasn't famous. She wasn't considered a promising new novelist. Most people around her had no reason to believe she was writing anything extraordinary. To them, she was simply another struggling parent and divorced woman trying to make ends meet. Still, every day she returned to the manuscript. Her apartment wasn't always comfortable. Heating was very expensive. Instead of staying home all day, she often took her daughter for walks until she fell asleep in her stroller. Then Joanne would stop at a cafe. She would buy one inexpensive cup of coffee. Sometimes, that single purchase gave her the permission to sit in the cafe for hours. While her daughter slept nearby, she kept on writing. Sentence after sentence. Chapter after chapter. Some people imagine best-selling novels beginning in beautiful writing studios, with expensive desks overlooking peaceful gardens. Harry Potter wasn't written that way. Large parts of it were built between ordinary tables in cafes, surrounded by conversations, clinking cups, and people who had no idea literary history was quietly written beside them. She wasn't chasing fame. At that point, fame seemed almost impossible. She simply wanted to finish the story she believed in. Eventually, she did. Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was complete. Now came another challenge: finding someone willing to publish it. Today, it's difficult to imagine publishers refusing Harry Potter. The books have sold hundreds of millions of copies. They've been translated into more than 80 languages. The characters are recognized almost everywhere. But none of that existed yet. Publishers only saw a manuscript from an unknown writer. And many weren't interested. The manuscript was submitted again, and again, and again. One rejection arrived. Then another. And another. In total, around 12 publishers declined it. Some thought children's fantasy wouldn't sell. Others simply weren't convinced. Rejection letters became a routine for her. For many writers, that would have been enough. 12 publishers saying no can feel like 12 confirmations that an idea isn't good enough. It's easy to assume everyone else sees something you don't. But Joanne kept submitting. Eventually, the manuscript reached Bloomsbury, a relatively small publishing house in London. Even there, acceptance wasn't immediate. According to the widely told story, Nigel Newton, the chairman of Bloomsbury, took the first chapter home. His young daughter read it. When she finished, she immediately wanted to know what happened next. She asked for a chapter 2. That simple reaction from an 8-year-old helped convince the publisher to take a chance. Even then, the expectations remained modest. Bloomsbury printed only about 500 hardcover copies in the first run, many of which went directly to libraries. No one expected worldwide success. In fact, Joanne received advice that seems almost unbelievable today. She was encouraged not to expect writing to provide a steady income. The suggestion was practical. Keep another job. Writing children's books probably wouldn't pay the bills. There was another concern, too. The publisher worried that boys might hesitate to read a fantasy novel written by a woman. So instead of publishing as Joanne Rowling, she was asked to use initials. She didn't actually have a middle name. To solve the problem, she borrowed one. K stood for Kathleen, her grandmother's name. And so the cover introduced readers to someone called J.K. Rowling. It sounded neutral. Mysterious, even. No one knew those 2 letters would soon become among the most recognizable initials in the history of publishing. The first readers loved the story. Word spread. Teachers recommended it. Librarians recommended it. Parents recommended it. Children passed copies to friends. Awards began arriving. Soon, American publishers noticed. Scholastic purchased the U.S. rights for a significant advance, giving Rowling financial stability she had never experienced before. Then came the second book. Then the third. Each release attracted larger audiences. Lines outside bookstores grew longer. Readers who normally disliked reading suddenly couldn't wait to turn another page. Entire families read the books together. Schools organized reading events. Release parties became global celebrations. Children dressed as wizards. Adults did too. It wasn't simply another successful series. It became a cultural event. Then Hollywood arrived. Warner Bros. Acquired the film rights. Casting began. Finding the right Harry, Hermione, and Ron became international news. When the first movie premiered in 2001, audiences finally saw Hogwarts brought to life. The castle, the moving staircases, the Great Hall, the Quidditch matches, the magical creatures. Everything the readers had imagined suddenly existed on screen. The films became enormous successes. Across 8 movies, the franchise earned billions of dollars worldwide. The books continued selling. Theme parks opened. Stage productions expanded the universe. Merchandise filled stores around the world. Harry Potter became one of the most valuable entertainment franchises ever created. Yet, if you trace everything backward, every movie ticket, every costume, every translation, every theme park attraction, every best-selling novel, every midnight book launch, every child who discovered a love of reading because of Harry Potter, it all leads back to one delayed train. One ordinary afternoon. One woman quietly imagining a lonely boy while looking out a window. And perhaps that's the most remarkable part. Success often looks inevitable after it happens. Looking backward, everything appears connected, as though the outcome was obvious all along. But it was. There was no guarantee. There was no publisher waiting. No film studio making offers. No crowds lining up outside bookstores. Only uncertainty. Only rejection letters. Only another chapter to write. Sometimes people focus so much on the ending of this story that they overlook the middle. The middle is where almost everyone gives up. It's where recognition hasn't arrived. Where the work feels invisible. Where progress is slow enough to make you wonder whether anyone will ever care. Joanne Rowling lived in that middle for years. She kept writing anyway. Not because success was sure, but because the story mattered enough to finish. The world eventually rewarded that persistence in extraordinary ways. But persistence came first. Recognition came later. Perhaps that's why the Harry Potter story continues to resonate with so many people. Yes, it's a story about magic. But behind the magic is another story. A quieter one. About resilience. About imagination and surviving difficult seasons. About continuing long before anyone applauds. The famous castles, films, and fortunes came afterward. Before all of that, there was simply a woman sitting in cafes, stretching one cup of coffee across an afternoon while her daughter slept beside her. Outside, life remained uncertain. Inside, she kept writing. She couldn't know that millions of readers were waiting. She couldn't know children who hadn't even been born, yet would someday grow up with Harry Potter. She couldn't know the story would become part of literary history. All she could do was finish the next page. And sometimes, that's how extraordinary things begin. Not with certainty. Not with permission. Just with someone deciding to continue, even when no one else can yet see what they're building. There's a woman in Canada who wrote a hockey romance novel in 2019. At the time, it arrived much the way thousands of novels do every year. No major television announcements. No blockbuster adaptation already waiting in the background. No expectation that millions of people would eventually watch its characters come to life on screen. It was simply another release from an author who had quietly built a loyal audience one book at a time. Her name is Reid. The novel was called Heated Rivalry. On the surface, it was a sports romance. But readers quickly realized it was about much more than hockey. It followed 2 professional hockey players. Shane Hollander, Ilya Rozanov. They played for rival teams. On the ice, they were fierce competitors. The media loved comparing them. Fans debated which player was better. Every game between their teams became another chapter in an ongoing rivalry. But away from the cameras, something entirely different was happening. Over the course of nearly a decade, their rivalry slowly transformed into friendship. Friendship became attraction. Attraction became love. And because both men were playing in one of the most physically demanding and traditionally masculine professional sports in the world, Nearly every part of that relationship had to remain hidden. That secret became the emotional heartbeat of the novel. Readers weren't simply following a romance. They were watching two people, constantly evaluating what they stood to lose against what they hoped to keep. Their careers, their friendships, their family expectations, their public image, their privacy. The relationship unfolded gradually. There were no sudden declarations, no dramatic overnight transformation. Instead, the story stretched across years, allowing both characters to grow older, wiser, and more honest with themselves. Many readers have said that slow progression made the relationship feel unusually believable. It felt earned. Rachel Reid had already written other books in what would become her Game Changers series, but Heated Rivalry quickly developed a special reputation among readers. Not because it sold the most copies immediately, but because people kept recommending it. Someone would finish the book, then tell a friend, and that same friend would recommend it online. Another reader would discover it months later, and the cycle would continue. It was the kind of success that doesn't always appear on bestseller headlines. Instead, it grew quietly. Reader by reader. Review by review. Conversation by conversation. Book communities on social media began discussing Shane and Ilya almost constantly. Fan art appeared. Quotes circulated online. Readers would return to favorite scenes years after finishing the novel. Some read it multiple times. Others described it as their introduction to hockey romance entirely. The Game Changers series continued expanding. Rachel Reid kept writing. She wasn't chasing television deals. She wasn't building stories specifically for Hollywood. She was simply creating the kinds of romances she wanted to read herself. Years passed. The book remained successful within its community. It was loved, recommended, adored. Then something unexpected happened. In 2023, filmmaker Jacob Tierney came across an article in the Washington Post discussing an interesting publishing trend. Hockey romance novels were becoming increasingly popular. Readers who had never watched a professional hockey game were suddenly becoming invested in fictional players and their lives. The genre was growing quickly. Curious, Tierney decided to see what readers were talking about. Somewhere during that search, one title appeared again and again. Heated Rivalry. Instead of simply reading reviews, he listened to the audiobook. As the story unfolded, something stood out. Yes, it was romantic and it centered around hockey. But underneath those elements was a remarkably human story about identity, vulnerability, loneliness, and the cost of hiding important parts of yourself. When he finished listening, he contacted Rachel Reid directly. He thought to himself if she would ever consider adapting the novel for television. For many writers, receiving that kind of message feels almost surreal. Most books never receive adaptation interest at all. Even fewer actually make it through development. Rachel was open to the conversation. But everyone involved understood that adapting Heated Rivalry would not be simple. Books and television tell stories differently. A novel allows readers to spend hundreds of pages inside a character's thoughts. Television has to communicate many of those same emotions through expressions, dialogue, silence, and performance. There were additional challenges as well. The novel included intimate scenes that played an important role in the emotional development of the relationship. Removing them entirely would change the story. Including them carelessly would also change the story. The adaptation couldn't rely only on romance. It needed emotional honesty. Jacob Tierney later explained that preserving the authenticity of Shane and Ilya's relationship became one of the project's biggest priorities. The goal wasn't simply to recreate scenes from the novel. It was to preserve the feeling readers experienced while reading them. That process took time. Development rarely moves quickly. Scripts were written, rewritten. Conversations continued. Financing had to be secured. Production partners had to believe enough in the project to invest. Casting required finding actors capable of portraying both elite professional athletes and deeply emotional characters. Locations had to be chosen. Schedules coordinated. Hundreds of creative decisions had to be made before filming could even begin. For audiences, adaptations sometimes appear suddenly. One day there's a trailer. A few months later, there's a series. But behind every announcement are years of work most viewers never see. Eventually, Canadian streaming platform Crave committed to producing the series. The project finally had a home. Filming moved forward. Fans of the novel watched every production update with excitement. Many wondered whether their favorite scenes would remain. Others hoped the emotional complexity of Shane and Ilya's relationship would survive the transition from page to screen. In late November 2025, Heated Rivalry premiered. There was optimism. There was excitement. But predicting audience reactions is almost impossible. Television history is full of adaptations that seemed destined for success before quietly disappearing. No one could know exactly what would happen. Then the viewers started watching. Word spread quickly. The response exceeded expectations. The series became one of Crave's strongest new releases. Longtime readers praised their performances. New viewers who had never heard of Rachel Reid discovered the story for the first time. Soon another important development followed. An international streaming service acquired the United States distribution rights. That decision introduced the series to an even larger audience. Once it became available outside Canada, conversations expanded rapidly. Viewers from different countries found the show. Many had never read the novel. Some didn't follow hockey at all. Yet they connected with the relationship at the center of the story. The romance wasn't limited to sports fans. It became a story about love, trust, fear, ambition, and authenticity. As audiences continued growing, awards season arrived. The series received recognition from organizations that celebrated meaningful storytelling. It won a media award for Outstanding New Series. The honor recognized thoughtful representation of LGBTQ characters and experiences. Later, another significant achievement award was being recognized by them. The Peabody Award. For decades, the Peabody Awards have recognized television and media that demonstrate exceptional storytelling and cultural impact. Receiving that honor placed Heated Rivalry alongside many of television's most respected productions. Not long afterward, a second season was officially confirmed. For readers who had followed the novels since 2019, it felt almost unbelievable. Characters who had once lived only inside the pages of a romance novel now had an expanding television future. But perhaps the most meaningful part of Rachel Reid's story isn't measured by awards, or streaming numbers, or ratings. It's measured by messages. Rachel has spoken publicly about hearing from readers and viewers whose lives unexpectedly intersected with her work. Some messages came from people working in professional sports. Hockey players, football players, basketball players. Individuals who privately described seeing parts of themselves reflected in Shane and Ilya. Many explained they had never seen that kind of story, told with such care, inside the world of elite athletics. Some thanked her for making them feel less alone. One former professional hockey player later shared publicly that the story helped him find the language to describe experiences he had struggled to explain for years. After leaving the sport, he eventually came out. He credited Heated Rivalry with helping him understand his own journey more clearly. For an author, it's difficult to imagine a greater compliment. Stories entertain. But sometimes, they also give people vocabulary. Sometimes they help readers recognize emotions they couldn't previously name. Sometimes they remind someone that another person has experienced something similar. Rachel Reid couldn't have predicted any of those outcomes while writing in 2019. She wasn't writing with award ceremonies in mind. She wasn't imagining streaming platforms competing for distribution rights. She wasn't expecting professional athletes to contact her years later. She was simply telling a story she believed deserved to exist. And perhaps that's the quiet lesson hidden inside her journey. Not every influential book begins as a publishing sensation. Some spend years finding their audience. Some travel slowly through recommendations instead of advertising. Some become beloved long before they become famous. Sometimes all it takes is one curious reader. One recommendation, one article, one filmmaker deciding to download an audiobook after reading about a growing literary trend. That single decision eventually connected Rachel Reid's novel to millions of viewers around the world. Looking backward, it almost feels inevitable. But it was not. It depended on countless ordinary moments. Someone recommending a book online. Someone writing a thoughtful review. Someone deciding to give an unfamiliar novel a chance. Each small decision quietly carried the story a little farther. Today, Heated Rivalry is remembered not only as a successful romance novel, but as a story that crossed mediums without losing the emotional honesty that first attracted readers. It demonstrated that intimate, character-driven romances could find audiences far beyond traditional publishing. It also reminded publishers, producers, and viewers that passionate communities often recognize remarkable stories long before the wider world notices them. Sometimes the loudest successes begin in complete silence. A novel released without enormous expectations. A dedicated group of readers who simply couldn't stop recommending it. A filmmaker who followed his curiosity. Years of patient development. And finally, a television series that reached people in ways no one involved could have fully anticipated. It all began with a single book, quietly published in 2019. For years, it seemed like a story only a devoted circle of readers knew. Then, almost without warning, that quiet story found the rest of the world. And once it did, it proved something that publishing has demonstrated time and time again. A truly memorable story doesn't always arrive with the biggest launch. Sometimes it simply waits for the right reader to discover it. And from there, it grows, one recommendation at a time. There's a woman who woke up from a dream on an ordinary morning in June of 2003 and couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen. It wasn't an especially dramatic morning. There were children to take care of. Household responsibilities waiting. The familiar rhythm of everyday life. But before any of that could begin, one image stayed with her. In her dream, there were two people standing together in a meadow. One was an ordinary teenage girl. The other was a beautiful young man whose skin shimmered in the sunlight. He loved her. He also feared being near her. Every instinct told him to protect her. Every instinct also warned him that he might be the greatest danger she would ever face. The emotional tension was what lingered. Love and restraint. Desire and fear. Safety and danger existing at the same time. Most dreams disappear within minutes of waking. This one didn't. It refused to fade. Her name was Stephenie Meyers. At that point, she wasn't an author. She had never published a novel. She hadn't studied creative writing professionally. She wasn't attending literary conferences or meeting with publishers. She was a stay-at-home mother, raising 3 young sons. Writing books wasn't part of her career plan. In fact, she had never seriously imagined becoming a novelist at all. But the dream continued replaying in her mind. Eventually, she reached a simple conclusion. The only way to stop thinking about it was to write it down. So she opened a computer and began describing the conversation she had witnessed in that meadow. She wasn't starting at chapter 1. She wasn't outlining an entire novel. She was simply recording a single scene before it disappeared. That first scene would later become one of the central moments of Twilight. Once it was written, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling finished, the story kept growing. Questions appeared almost immediately. Who were these people? How had they met? Why was the boy so afraid? Why did he sparkle? What happened before that conversation? What happened afterward? The only way to answer those questions was to keep writing. One chapter became several. Several became dozens. Soon, Stephenie realized she wasn't writing a short story. She was writing a novel. Like many parents, her days were already full. There were meals to prepare, laundry, school schedules, appointments, the endless collection of small responsibilities that fill ordinary family life. Writing had to fit around everything else. She often worked late at night after the children were asleep. Sometimes during nap times. Sometimes whenever she found an unexpected quiet moment. She wasn't following a publishing deadline. No editor was waiting. No readers even knew the manuscript existed. She was simply following the story wherever it wanted to go. Months passed. The characters became clearer. The ordinary teenage girl became Bella Swan. The mysterious young man became Edward Cullen. Bella moved to the rainy town of Forks, Washington. Edward belonged to a family of vampires who had chosen an unusual way of living. Instead of hunting humans, they survived by drinking animal blood. It was a fragile compromise. One mistake could destroy everything. The setting itself became part of the story. Forks wasn't chosen by accident. Its frequent cloud cover created a believable environment for vampires who avoided direct sunlight. The forests, the mountains, the constant rain. Everything contributed to an atmosphere that felt quiet, isolated, and mysterious. Readers would later travel to Forks simply because they wanted to experience the places described in the novels. As Stephenie continued writing, she focused less on traditional vampire mythology and more on relationships. The supernatural elements remained important, but the emotional core centered on choices. Trust, self-control, sacrifice, growing up, finding identity. These themes helped the story connect with readers who might never have considered themselves fans of fantasy. Eventually, the manuscript was finished. Now came a completely different challenge: finding someone willing to publish it. Like countless first-time writers, Stephenie entered the unfamiliar world of literary agents. For most large publishing houses, manuscripts don't arrive directly on an editor's desk. Agents act as representatives. They evaluate manuscripts, decide which ones they believe in, and present them to publishers. Without an agent, many novels never receive serious consideration. Stephenie researched agencies, prepared query letters, sent submissions. Then she waited. Some never received responses. Others resulted in polite rejections. This experience is quite familiar to many aspiring authors. Publishing moves slowly. Responses can take weeks, sometimes months. Silence becomes part of the process. Every unanswered submission creates another opportunity to wonder whether the manuscript simply isn't good enough. But Stephenie kept trying. Eventually, she found an agent willing to represent the novel. That single decision changed everything. With professional representation, Twilight reached publishers. Several expressed interest. The response became surprisingly competitive. Instead of struggling to attract attention, the manuscript eventually generated multiple offers. Little, Brown and Company acquired the publishing rights. For a first-time novelist with no previous publishing history, it was an extraordinary breakthrough. Editors saw potential, but no one could predict exactly what would happen after publication. In October 2005, Twilight officially reached bookstores. The response was immediate. Readers connected with Bella and Edward almost instantly. Word-of-mouth recommendations spread rapidly. Teenagers recommended the novel to classmates. Parents borrowed copies from their children. Book clubs discussed it. Libraries developed waiting lists. Independent bookstores began displaying larger stacks. National bestseller lists followed. Soon readers wanted more. Stephenie had already imagined a larger story. Additional novels expanded Bella and Edward's world. New Moon, Eclipse, Breaking Dawn. Each release attracted larger audiences than the one before. Midnight launch parties became common. Fans lined up outside bookstores hours before release. Some arrived wearing costumes. Others carried homemade signs. Many had pre-ordered copies months in advance. Reading became a shared event. Friends finished books overnight so they could discuss them together the next morning. Online forums exploded with theories. Readers debated favorite characters. Some passionately supported Bella and Edward. Others preferred Bella and Jacob. The discussions became so widespread that phrases like Team Edward and Team Jacob entered popular culture. The books did something especially significant for publishing. They helped introduce millions of young readers to the young adult fiction category. Of course, YA literature had existed for decades. Many remarkable authors had already built the foundation. But Twilight brought unprecedented commercial attention to the genre. Publishers noticed. Bookstores expanded their young adult sections. Agents searched for new voices. Writers found greater opportunities to publish stories aimed at teenage audiences. In many ways, Twilight helped reshape the publishing landscape of the late 2000s. Hollywood noticed too. Only a few years after publication, Summit Entertainment acquired the film rights. Casting became major entertainment news. Fans debated who should portray Bella Swan. Who could possibly become Edward Cullen? When Kristen Stewart and Robert Pattinson were announced, reactions were mixed at first. Readers often develop vivid mental images of beloved characters. No casting choice satisfies everyone immediately. Then filming began. The first movie premiered in 2008. Audiences arrived in enormous numbers. The film became a global success. Sequels followed, one after another. The franchise expanded into 5 films adapted from the 4 novels. Collectively, the movies earned billions of dollars worldwide. Soundtracks became hugely popular. Filming locations attracted tourists. Merchandise appeared everywhere. The cultural impact extended far beyond bookstores. For several years, Twilight became one of the defining entertainment phenomena of its generation. Whether people loved the series, critiqued it, or simply knew about it through friends, almost everyone recognized the names Bella and Edward. Yet behind all of that success remained a surprisingly ordinary beginning. No publishing career. No elaborate marketing strategy. No years spent networking inside the literary world. Just one unforgettable dream. Stephenie Meyer has often explained that she never intended to become famous. She wasn't trying to create a multimedia franchise. She wasn't analyzing market trends. She wasn't studying which genres sold the best. She simply wanted to write down the scene before she forgot it. Everything else followed afterward. Looking back, it's tempting to imagine success as inevitable. But there were countless moments where the story could have ended before readers ever discovered it. She could have dismissed the dream. She could have assumed someone else had probably written something similar. She could have convinced herself she wasn't qualified to write a novel. She could have stopped after recording only the original meadow scene. Instead, she remained curious. She asked another question, then another, and another. Those questions eventually became hundreds of pages. Those pages became a manuscript. That manuscript became a published novel. That novel became one of the best-selling book series of the 21st century. Its influence stretched beyond entertainment. It inspired countless readers to begin writing their own stories. Many authors who entered publishing during the following decade have described Twilight as one of the books that convinced them ordinary people could become novelists. Publishers also began paying closer attention to passionate online reading communities. Booksellers recognized the growing influence of reader recommendations. Film studios looked more seriously at young adult adaptations. One story unexpectedly influenced multiple industries at once. And yet none of those outcomes existed on that morning, in June 2003. There was only a mother waking from an unusually vivid dream. She had no audience, no publishing contract, no guarantee that anyone besides herself would ever read what she was about to write. All she had was an idea that refused to disappear. Perhaps that's why her story continues to resonate with so many aspiring writers. It reminds us that inspiration rarely arrives according to schedule. It doesn't ask whether someone has professional experience. It doesn't wait until life becomes less busy. Sometimes it appears in the middle of ordinary routines. Sometimes it interrupts completely unremarkable days. Sometimes it arrives while we're asleep. The difficult part isn't having the idea. The difficult part is honoring it, finding enough time to explore it, choosing to continue when nobody is expecting anything from you. Stephenie Meyers did exactly that. She protected one unexpected dream long enough for it to become a finished story. Years later, millions of readers would discover Bella and Edward. Billions of dollars would be generated through books and films. An entire generation would associate rainy forests, sparkling vampires, and impossible romances with Twilight. But before all of that, there was only one quiet morning. One memorable dream. One woman deciding that the scene in her imagination deserved to exist somewhere beyond her own thoughts. Sometimes remarkable stories don't begin with years of planning. Sometimes they begin with waking up, remembering a dream, and choosing not to let it fade away. There's a woman who spent years writing historical romance in a genre that much of the literary world rarely treated with the respect it gave other forms of fiction. Her name is Julia Quinn. Long before millions of viewers around the world knew the names Daphne, Anthony, Colin, Penelope, or Lady Whistledown, Julia was quietly building their world one novel at a time. Not for television, not for streaming, simply for readers who loved romance. When Julia Quinn began publishing in the 1990s, historical romance already had a devoted audience. Readers loved stories set in the Regency period of early 19th century England. Elegant ballrooms, country estates, formal dances, handwritten letters, society gossip, families navigating expectations, reputation, and love. Yet despite the genre's enormous commercial success, it was often overlooked by critics. Romance novels sold millions of copies every year. They consistently appeared on bestseller lists. Libraries circulated them constantly. Bookstores devoted entire sections to them. And still, they were frequently described as light entertainment rather than serious literature. Many readers learned to ignore those opinions. They continued buying the books they loved. Authors continued writing them. Julia Quinn was one of those authors. She hadn't originally planned on becoming a full-time novelist. She studied history in college. Later, she even prepared for medical school. Writing began almost as an experiment. She wondered whether she could finish a novel. She discovered that she could. Then she wrote another. And another. Eventually, writing became her career. Early in that career, she developed an idea that would become her most famous work. Instead of writing a single romance centered on one couple, she thought to herself, what if she created an entire family? Not just background characters, not relatives who occasionally appeared, but 8 siblings, each with a distinct personality, each eventually receiving an entire novel devoted to their own love story. The family would be called the Bridgertons. There was Anthony, responsible, protective, sometimes stubborn. Benedict, creative, independent, often searching for where he truly belonged. Colin, curious, charming, always eager for adventure. Daphne, kind, thoughtful, determined. Alois, intelligent, opinionated, constantly questioning the expectations placed upon women. Francesca, quiet, observant. Gregory, optimistic. Hyacinth, quick-witted and fearless. Together, they formed a family readers genuinely enjoyed spending time with. That became one of the series' greatest strengths. Each novel focused primarily on one sibling. But the others never disappeared. They continued attending family dinners, offering advice, teasing one another, arguing, celebrating, making mistakes, growing older together. Readers weren't simply returning for another romance. They were returning to visit a family they had gradually come to know. The first novel, The Duke and I, was published in 2000. It introduced Daphne Bridgerton and Simon Basset, the Duke of Hastings. Readers embraced the story. Julia continued writing. The Viscount Who Loved Me. An Offer from a Gentleman. Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. To Sir Philip with Love. When He Was Wicked. It's in His Kiss. On the Way to the Wedding. All these books followed another over several years. Each expanded the Bridgerton family a little further. There was no enormous media frenzy. No blockbuster adaptation already in development. No expectation that these books would someday become one of television's biggest global successes. Instead, the novels found readers gradually. Historical romance has always depended heavily on recommendations. Readers lend books to friends. Book clubs discover favorite authors. Libraries introduce new audiences. People finish one novel and immediately begin searching for another. Julia Quinn steadily built one of the most loyal readerships in the genre. Her fans appreciated more than the romances themselves. They loved the humor, the playful conversations, the warmth between siblings, the sense that family remained central even as each character pursued love. Many historical romances focused almost entirely on a single couple. Julia created something that felt larger. A continuing world. Returning characters made every new novel feel connected to the previous ones. Readers watched younger siblings mature across multiple books before eventually becoming the central character themselves. This created anticipation that lasted for years. By the time Colin finally received his own novel, readers already felt they knew him. The same was true for Alois, for Hyacinth, for Gregory. Each story rewarded readers who had remained with the family from the beginning. Throughout those years, romance publishing continued thriving. Commercially, it was one of publishing's strongest categories. Culturally, it often received less recognition than other genres. People sometimes dismissed romance as predictable, too emotional, Too simple. Many of those assumptions ignored the remarkable skill involved in writing compelling emotional relationships, creating believable chemistry, maintaining tension across hundreds of pages, developing characters readers genuinely care about. These are difficult tasks, but Julia Quinn mastered them through years of practice. She didn't spend time arguing that romance deserved greater respect. She simply kept writing excellent romance novels, one after another. Years passed, then decades. The first Bridgerton novel had now existed for nearly 20 years. Many successful book series quietly remain successful within publishing. They build loyal audiences, continue selling steadily, then gradually become classics within their genre. That easily could have been Bridgerton's story. Instead, something unexpected happened. In 2017, Shonda Rhimes signed a major creative partnership with Netflix. By then, she had already transformed modern television. She was the creator behind enormously successful series including Grey's Anatomy, Scandal, and How to Get Away with Murder. Audiences trusted her storytelling. The television industry paid close attention to every project she chose. Somewhere during the search for future adaptations, the Bridgerton novels captured her attention. Shonda Rhimes explained that she was immediately drawn to the books. The romance, the humor, the family, the emotional relationships. Everything that had kept readers engaged for years seemed equally promising for television. Netflix acquired the rights. Development officially began. Adapting 8 interconnected novels presented unusual challenges. Each book focused on different central characters. Television audiences, however, often expect continuing storylines across multiple seasons. The creative team needed to preserve what readers loved while expanding the world enough to sustain an ongoing series. Chris Van Dusen became the show's creator. Working closely with Shondaland, the production company founded by Rhimes, he began translating Julia Quinn's Regency world into television. Some elements remained faithful to the novels. Others expanded considerably. Perhaps the most significant addition involved Lady Whistledown. In the books, her society gossip columns connected many stories. The television adaptation elevated her role, making her anonymous narration one of the series' defining features. Julie Andrews provided the voice. Her narration became instantly recognizable. Production designers recreated Regency London with extraordinary attention to detail. Costume designers produced thousands of elaborate gowns, jackets, military uniforms, jewelry pieces, and accessories. Music arranged modern pop songs into orchestral performances. Contemporary storytelling blended with historical aesthetics. The result felt familiar and completely fresh at the same time. The series also embraced inclusive casting, presenting a more diverse version of Regency England than audiences had traditionally seen in period dramas. The creative decision generated extensive discussion. Many viewers welcomed the broader representation. Others debated historical interpretation. Regardless of opinions, the choice distinguished Bridgerton from virtually every major period romance that had come before it. When the first season premiered on Netflix in December 2020, expectations were optimistic. Few predicted what happened next. Within weeks, Bridgerton became one of Netflix's biggest English-language series ever released. Millions of households streamed it around the world. Social media filled with discussions about favorite scenes, costumes, music, and characters. Viewers who had never read historical romance suddenly found themselves fascinated by Regency society. Bookstores immediately experienced renewed demand for Julia Quinn's novels. Readers who discovered the television series wanted the original books. Longtime fans happily welcomed new readers into a world they had enjoyed for decades. Suddenly, novels first published 20 years earlier returned to bestseller lists. Few authors experience that kind of publishing revival. The television adaptation transformed an already successful series into an international phenomenon. Then came season 2. Rather than continuing Daphne's romance as the primary focus, the show followed the structure Julia Quinn had established years earlier. Each sibling would eventually receive their own story. Season 2 centered on Anthony Bridgerton and Kate Sharma, adapted primarily from The Viscount Who Loved Me. Audiences embraced the enemies-to-lovers romance. Many praised Jonathan Bailey and Simone Ashley for their performances. The second season, once again, ranked among Netflix's biggest global releases. Rather than fading after initial excitement, the franchise continued expanding. Season 3 shifted attention toward Colin Bridgerton and Penelope Featherington, drawing heavily from romancing Mr. Bridgerton. Because viewers had spent 2 previous seasons watching their friendship develop, the emotional payoff felt especially satisfying. Years of character development mirrored what readers had experienced in the novels. Meanwhile, Queen Charlotte, a character greatly expanded for television, received her own limited series. Although based partly on historical figures rather than Julia Quinn's original novels, the series explored the Queen's early marriage and further expanded the Bridgerton universe. It demonstrated that the world surrounding the Bridgerton family had become large enough to support entirely new stories. Netflix continued investing heavily in the franchise. Future seasons were announced. Benedict's journey already begun and ended. Then Alois. Then Francesca. Eventually, Gregory and Hyacinth would be the last duo. The long-term structure Julia Quinn imagined decades earlier provided an unusually strong foundation for television. Each sibling already possessed a complete romantic arc. Each book offered another season waiting to happen. As the franchise expanded, its influence extended beyond streaming numbers. Interest in historical romance increased. Publishers reported renewed enthusiasm for Regency fiction. Readers explored authors they had never encountered before. Book clubs selected romance novels more frequently. Writers entering the genre discovered larger audiences than ever. Fashion designers referenced Regency-inspired styles. Travel interest grew around historic English estates. Classical covers of contemporary songs became increasingly popular after viewers embraced Bridgerton's orchestral soundtrack. One adaptation unexpectedly influenced publishing, fashion, music, and popular culture simultaneously. Through all of this, Julia Quinn remained remarkably consistent when discussing her success. She often emphasized that the books came first. Long before cameras. Long before elaborate sets. Long before global premieres. She had already created the Bridgerton family. She had already imagined their conversations, their heartbreak, their celebrations, their complicated relationships with one another. Television amplified that world. It didn't invent it. Perhaps that's what makes her story especially meaningful. For years, she continued writing within a genre many people underestimated. She didn't abandon romance to pursue something considered more prestigious. She didn't dramatically change her voice, hoping for mainstream approval. She trusted the readers who already loved her work. Eventually, millions of new readers arrived. Not because she changed. Because the rest of the world finally noticed what romance readers had known for years. That compelling love stories deserve just as much care, craftsmanship, humor, and emotional depth as any other form of literature. Looking back, the success of Bridgerton almost feels inevitable. But it was. It depended on years of patient writing. 8 carefully constructed novels. A loyal community of readers recommending the books to friends. A producer willing to recognize potential where others saw only genre fiction. A streaming platform willing to invest in romance on an extraordinary scale. Every step built upon the one before it. Today, Bridgerton stands as one of the defining streaming franchises of its generation. Yet its beginning was remarkably quiet. One author. One historical romance novel. One family introduced to readers in the year 2000. She couldn't know that 20 years later, audiences across nearly every continent would be watching those same characters fall in love. She couldn't know that the siblings she patiently developed over 8 novels would eventually become one of television's most recognizable families. All she could do was write the next book, then the one after that, then the next. Sometimes, that's how the biggest cultural phenomena are built. Not through a single extraordinary moment, but through years of steady, consistent work that quietly waits for the rest of the world to catch up.